When I think about labor productivity, I'm really thinking about the tools and the metrics that contractors use to understand whether the craft workforce as a whole is efficient. Are they installing work at the rate necessary to deliver, the project on time and on budget? And usually these are sort of the key performance indicators that construction managers will use to determine if things like production, productivity, labor performance, the cost performance of the project are all occurring at the rate needed to deliver a project on time and profitably. And these data typically look at the hours expended as a function of production installed. Some of the key metrics that we're sort of talking about are things like budget unit rates, unit cost, to date and to go performance factors. You can get into some of the more complex stuff like earned value and earned schedule, estimate of completion, forecasting, projections, et cetera, et cetera. There's loads of different variations of the theme, but these are some of the key indicators that you might put in the bucket of labor productivity. And what I really want to talk about today is some of the enhancements and innovations in this, but also the general data space that it's sort of worth considering.
I think for most subcontractors, labor productivity reporting is really a function of their ERP or accounting system. And construction is, quite unique in that it uses job cost accounting rather than traditional, general ledger accounting. And this is a function of the performance reporting of the ERPs that are more construction centric. So think of your Viewpoint, Spectrum, Sage 200 of the world. You can go on with other ERPs that support really kind of this function. Most ERPs and accounting tools will do some aspect of project performance reporting, but really the best reports are those that are designed for the specific characteristics of construction. And as such, usually come from the dedicated construction tools and ERPs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Greg introduced job cost accounting, which is really one of the big
Big
characteristics.
topic. Yeah.
Yeah, big characteristic of the construction industry. Um, and it's a big part of why the construction industry is quite unique and how and why some of the tools that do construction reporting do it better than others. And job cost accounting is really around the way in which a project gets estimated, budgeted, and more importantly, controlled. It's all about how each job is doing and how all the different financial elements of that particular project roll up to the financial reporting at the company level. And while it's not explicitly unique to construction, it's really characteristic of it and adds a lot of complexity. And what it ultimately means is that most of the ERPs that are not truly construction centric don't accommodate that complexity particularly well. So if you use a generic ERP, and I won't mention any names, but there's a lot of good ERPs out there, but they're not necessarily purely construction centric. Straight out of the box, a lot of the tools that are out there will indicate your company financial performance, but they're not really going to tell you about the metrics that drive labor productivity at the job level particularly well. And so straight out of the gate, if you're one of these companies that uses a non-construction centric ERP, you've already out of the gate have a real challenge to try and solve to start to understand labor productivity at the project level. And that is one of the big challenges that companies have to overcome when they're thinking about which ERP to use, with cloud and various other motivating factors that might drive you to consider a different ERP or the one that you're currently on. So that's one of the big challenges right now that I think people are struggling with, that is a big trend in the industry moving forward, with a lot of changes in the ERP space that companies have to consider.
So I think, let's start off with frequency of reporting. Most construction tools report out at the same frequency as companies process payroll, as labor productivity formula includes time as part of those calculations. Construction ERPs will take the time data from payroll and combine it weekly with production metrics. And then once payroll is run, the data is all combined in the ERP and used to generate those reports. What that means is that you can only report out on the previous period's data once timekeeping has been run. You're always reporting out on last week's data. You're constantly looking over your shoulder. And for instance, in Canada, for example, many companies run their payroll biweekly. So the problem here is actually compounded. Maybe looking at data that's 3 weeks old. No one ever wants to be reviewing living in stale data. So this is a real headache for a lot of organizations. The timeliness of data is one of the biggest challenges that we see companies trying to overcome. They want to know how they're performing today and what drove outcomes this week. Timeliness of data allows people to be more proactive and responses within reporting and actions. There is a need here for proactivity as opposed to being reactive. And timeliness of data is a critical driver in helping organizations be proactive.
Yeah,
Guy,
absolutely.
sorry, Tyler, say, Guy, I would love your take here. That's the first thing that kind of popped in my head, but would love you to weigh in as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a big challenge from when I was doing project controls as well. So, I mean, you have to think about sort of human nature. The idea of asking folks to be accountable for things that happened in the past is really one of the big challenges of labor productivity reporting in the construction industry. You know, you've got these really dynamic job sites where leaders are managing many moving parts, and you're asking them to think, well, what happened last week? What happened 2 weeks ago? Yeah, practically, they've moved on, right? They're focused on the things that are in front of them tomorrow. They've got different problems to solve. And construction really needs to understand what's going to happen in the future, you know, planning and scheduling, sequencing the work more effectively. People are trying to solve the problems that are coming up tomorrow, not trying to explain what's happened in the past. And so really one of the big challenges and opportunities that we think about when we're looking at data, you know, one of the big trends with big data in general is how can you use data to be more proactive, predictive, agile, not reactive. And I think that's one of the biggest trends that we see generally is how to use your data to be more proactive. How do you use your data to make better decisions? And you know, the traditional approaches for construction labor productivity are so generic in that respect. I think that's one of the big trends that we're seeing in the industry in general.
Yeah. Are there any other challenges that people have?
Yeah, no, I mean, in that same theme, big challenges with how people capture, combine, and use all the data that they currently have in general, or
Yeah.
actually data that they need to have. I think if you think about the history of construction labor productivity, it's always been very numbers based, very numerical, very quantitative. And if you think about ERPs, most of those tools are very accounting centric in their nature. So that's kind of what you expect. They're all general ledger accounting tools or even job cost accounting tools, but they're fundamentally accounting tools. They document transactions and so forth. But ultimately, construction is very nuanced. It's very context specific. You know, stuff happens, plan change, and it's all about understanding and responding to these that drives outcomes on projects. And project managers, by their very nature, are very good at managing that change. You know, so they specialize that they're great problem solvers, but the systems and tools that construction companies use to record and document that data are really bad at it. And I think this is one of the big opportunities as we think about big data and you know the emerging concepts of sort of AI and machine learning in the industry is it's how do you gather the data that helps to inform those sorts of conversations and decisions more effectively. And I mean, if you think about that concept of quantitative data, you know, most of the companies, most folks will measure that sort of quantitative or sort of that qualitative nature on daily reports. But for many people, the daily reports are a box ticking exercise. And not just daily reports, but a lot of the other workflows that you might capture, whether it's safety or quality or weekly reporting or just anything that's documenting what happens on the job site, that information is usually separated. And we think there's a huge opportunity from bringing those different data sets together to tell a more compelling story. And companies that want to do that now, but who really rely on ERPs are going to struggle to change the paradigm for reporting. And that's really where you start to see people, you know, opening up their horizons to software selections, data strategies, and how do they use this data to inform labor productivity metrics and tell a different story. I think that's one of the big trends that you're starting to see is you know, how do you get people to use more data and what fundamental questions does it cause people to ask of their current systems and processes and tools?
You know, I think at Rhumbix and just in general, you know, we're starting to see a narrowed focus on the enterprise value of data in the industry. I'll give you some examples. You know, people are investing heavily in advanced solutions for data hosting, integrating all of their tools, hosting data in the cloud, developing enterprise data solutions with advanced data architecture and analytics in mind. This is still pretty challenging for most in the industry, but we're definitely seeing the most sophisticated companies pursue this. And then you think about really the opposite end of the spectrum there. We're hearing a lot in discussions, with clients looking to simplify their tech stack in order to make data aggregation and management, much easier. In theory, if you have fewer, better tools for data, then getting insights from that data should be a lot easier. And there's obviously a lot in between, but simplification and standardization are really important and critical to help move the needle there.
Yeah, so bringing this back to labor productivity, where do we go from here?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one. I think there are a few big trends that people should really be paying attention to as part of labor productivity tracking in general, but better insights across the board from on construction projects. So standardization is, I think, a really, really big one. You're starting to see a lot more of this from programs like Procore and Autodesk that are more platform oriented. The emergence of non-ERP tools to do more of the heavy lifting in terms of reporting and analytics in the industry, because they have a more expansive data in mind. But at the end of the day, standardization of tools to inform that are really, really important. Not, they don't all have a good mobile centric component from the field to measure labor productivity, but standardization, get rid of tools that don't play well in a large enterprise grade data strategy and look at alternatives that'll be more compatible. If you think about timekeeping, what we specialize in, as well as labor productivity reporting, you may love your current timekeeping tool. It might be the best thing since sliced bread. The guys in the field love it. But if it doesn't integrate well with your existing tools or make that data readily available for analytics, then it's not really going to deliver the outcomes that you're looking for if you're thinking about an enterprise grade data strategy. And then talking about sort of, the Procores and the Autodesk of this world, they've done some really interesting work over the last couple of years, sort of combined with the flexibility of building information modeling, which is increasing the level of detail that you can track at for labor productivity. So both of them, Procore Financials, but also Cost Management and Autodesk, give you the ability to add levels of hierarchy and detail in the system so that you can track your production in the field at a higher level of fidelity than you might do in the ERP. And this is really, really powerful because people are trying to understand at a more granular level what's happening on the job site. But if all you are doing is tracking these high-level financial metrics in your ERP, very, very difficult to sort of bring those two things together. And so models, what those two organizations are doing, and then how we support that with things like our software and others as well. It's not just us. That's really, really helpful in giving contractors the flexibility to track at the optimal level of detail without having to go right the way back through the estimate and their estimating, controlling, budgeting process and changing all of that as well. That's it's definitely one that we think is going to be pretty impactful in the industry. What else is there?
I think another one would be moving off Excel and over to BI.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We see a load of contractors, that still use Excel pretty heavily to manage a lot of their labor productivity reporting. Manage the reports that ERPs don't do well. And Excel is great, but there are much better solutions out there, really, really being driven by the adoption of BI tools. And Power BI is probably the one we see most frequently in the construction industry. And Power BI really enables you to take all these different disparate data sources, stitch them all together, and you can automate, the data transfer and data manipulation and the generation of reports, the sending out of these reports. And you think about how much time people would spend taking data from one tool, dropping it into another, automating it, manipulating it, digitizing it. There's just thousands and thousands of hours that can be recovered across construction companies by automating that. It's amazing how many people we still speak to who never heard of Power BI or never heard of business intelligence tools. And that's just such a powerful feature for improving labor productivity. And it's a big part of what we do with our software and who we partner with in terms of data and reporting. And I think the other thing on that same theme, and BI really enables this, is the idea of reporting out across organizations to get a more holistic view of what's driving outcomes within construction companies. So it's kind of going back to the beginning around job cost accounting. Job cost is all around what's happening for a particular project, but senior leaders in these construction companies are trying to get a more holistic view about what is driving outcomes on projects across the board, because that is ultimately what's driving final financial performance across the company. And again, ERPs don't do a great job of that. And so we think there's a huge opportunity to be had. It's a big focus area of us at Rhumbix to, you know, what are the factors that are driving outcomes across your projects? What are the trends that are impacting your projects that, you know, if you fix this, might actually solve the problems that you have on 5 or 6 jobs. And realistically, you know, people are very short of time, as is everybody. And so if you can identify those problems that are affecting multiple projects, you know, that are going to give you the greatest bang for your buck, that's a huge opportunity. And again, ERPs don't do a particularly good job of that because of the way that they're, you know, inherently architected. And so we think that's a really significant opportunity to drive enterprise value, and is a big part of, it's ultimately how a lot of the things that we've spoken about today will sort of accrue, and the benefits that companies can start to deliver on the back of that. So yeah, I think that's definitely a few things to think about there.
Think Guy kind of ended on a high note there. You know, at Rhumbix, you know, that's really one of our focuses, is providing that enterprise level data to customers in the industry to help inform in the here and now, and to be proactive as opposed to reactive. A big focus in the industry and a big focus of ours as well.
That's great. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today on a very important topic for our Trailer Talk series. And we'll see you next month.